And
Okay, start
yeah,
right now then, Elizabeth.
well, let me get my coffee. So get one reader first. I'll do the second one, and then I'll be listening pretty much. Okay.
Chapter 27 of God to Man and Man to God, the Discourses of Meher Baba, edited by Charles Purdom. Discourse 27, the element of sex. Sex as one of the most important elements in the life of man is within the sphere of duality. As with everything in human life, it exists in the opposites, which are the creations of the mind. As with the alternatives of joy or pain, good or bad, solitude or company, attraction or repulsion, so indulgence and repression are the alternatives in sex, from which there is thought to be no escape. Life sways between the alternatives, and he who adopts repression is dissatisfied and thinks of indulgence. While she who indulges longs for the freedom of repression. Thus arises one of the most vital and complicated problems of life. To solve the problem, the mind must understand that the alternatives are equally the creation of imagination under the influence of craving. Craving is present in the repression of sex as well as in its gratification. Both presuppose the vitiation of consciousness by the operation of lust or the desire for sensations. Since it does not go beyond these opposites, the movement is always from one opposite to the other, and consequently from one disappointment to another. There is diminution of being and lack of happiness, whether the craving is gratified or not. The restless mind finds illusory happiness in the gratification of desire, and realizing the illusion seeks freedom through repression. The false promises of the opposites. In spite of alternate and repeated disappointments, the mind does not renounce the cause of unhappiness, which is the craving itself. Thus it moves as within a cage. The gateway to the spiritual path of internal renunciation of craving remains closed, for internal renunciation of craving is as different from mechanical repression as it is from indulgence. The need for indulgence or repression arises when the nature of the craving is not understood. When a man or woman becomes awake to the inevitable bondage entailed by craving, they begin to disburden their mind of craving through understanding. It should, however, be borne in mind that the life of freedom is nearer to restraint than to indulgence, though essentially different from both. Hence, the life of celibacy is preferable to married life if restraint comes easily. without an undue sense of self-repression. But such restraint is difficult and sometimes impossible, so that married life is usually more helpful than a life of celibacy. Celibacy and marriage. Just as the life of celibacy calls for the development of many virtues, the married life nourishes the growth of spiritual qualities of the utmost importance. The value of celibacy lies in restraint and the sense of detachment that it gives. But so long as the mind is not free from craving, there is no freedom. In the same way, the value of marriage lies in mutual adjustment and the sense of unity. But true union, or the dissolution of duality, is possible only through divine life, which can never be felt so long as there is a shadow of craving. Only by treading the path of inner renunciation of craving is it possible to attain freedom and unity. Meher, do you care to read?
Jai Baba. For the celibate is celibate, as for the married, the path of inner life is the same. When the aspirant is drawn by the truth, he longs for nothing else. And as the truth increasingly comes with the understanding, he disburdens himself of craving. Whatever in celibacy of the marriage, he is no longer swayed by the despotive promise and practices internal renunciation of craving.
Renunciation.
Of craving until freed from the deceptive opposite. The path
Deceptive. Deceptive. Means lying.
Opposite, the path is open to all, whether in celibacy or in marriage, and whether a man begins from celibacy or from marriage depends upon his sanskaras and karmic ties. He accepts the condition that his past life has determined for him, and utilizes them towards spiritual advancement. I don't know how to say it.
Advancement.
Yeah. And in the light of the ideal he has come to perceive, a choice has to be made between celibacy of married life, and there must be no attempt at compromise sex gratification apart from marriage lands both men and women into spiritual chaos.
Chaos.
It veils the higher values, perpetuates entanglements, and creates insurmountable difficulties in spiritual path. Internal renunciation
of internal renunciation
of craving, sex and marriage is entirely different from sex. Outside marriage, in marriage, the sanskaras are much lighter and capable of removal more easily when sex companionship is accompanied by a sense of personal responsibility, love, and spiritual aspiration. The conditions exist of submission of sex
That's sublimation of
the
sex.
temptation of explore the possibility of sex contact is formidable, and only by maximum restriction of activity of merry sex can a man or woman arrive at understanding of the higher values attainable. Mind endeavors and understand sex through the transformation of sex to love. But if the mind endeavors to the understanding sex, otherwise there is no end to the declusions to which it must be prey, because there is no end of enlarging their scope. Okay, can someone else take it, please?
Yes, Elizabeth, are you ready?
Yeah, I am. Thanks. Infinity attainable through marriage. Truth cannot be understood by multiplying superficial contacts. It requires full preparedness to free the mind and to enable discrimination to be made between the higher and the lower, and the transcendence of the lower in favor of the higher. Wholehearted concentration and interest is necessarily excluded when the mind becomes a slave to sensations. In married life, there are opportunities to recognize and annul the limiting factors in experience. By the gradual elimination of desire and the progression through a series of increasingly richer experiences of love and sacrifice, married people may arrive at infinity. The sanctification of married life. Most persons enter into married life as a matter of course, but immense spiritual possibilities are accessible through it, which depend upon the right attitude at the start. From the spiritual point of view, married life will be a success only if it is entered upon as a spiritual enterprise intended to discover what life can be at its best. When the two partners together launch upon the spiritual adventure of exploring the higher possibilities of the spirit, they must, at the outset, surrender all calculations concerning the nature and amount of individual gain. Married life makes upon both the partners demands of mutual adjustment and understanding, and creates many problems beyond their expectation. This is true of life in general, but particularly true of married life. In married life, two souls linked with each other are called upon to tackle the whole complex of personality together. This is exactly where married life is different from all other forms of sex association. The values of the various sides of the limited personality can best be appreciated in the varied settings and perspectives of married life. There is scope, for a great variety of experiences and the adoption of a definite scheme of thought and behavior. The spiritual value of married life is directly related to the nature of the factors that determine daily experience. If based upon shallow considerations, it can deteriorate into a partnership in selfishness against the rest of the world. But inspired by lofty idealism, it can be raised to a fellowship which not only calls forth increasingly greater sacrifices from each other, but becomes a medium through which two souls can offer their united love and service to the whole family of humanity. When married life is thus brought into conformity with the divine plan for the evolution of the individual, it becomes a pure blessing to the children that are the fruit of that marriage, where they get the advantage of a spiritual atmosphere from the beginning of their earthly career. Children and birth control. Though children are thus the benefactors from married life, the parents have their own lives enriched, where children give to the parents an opportunity for spontaneous love, in which sacrifice becomes a delight. And the part played by children in the life of parents is of tremendous importance. In view of the claims that children have on married life, the present birth control movement deserves attention and critical examination. The question must not be considered from the point of view of any limited interests, but from that of the ultimate well-being of the individual and society. The right opinion has to be based upon spiritual considerations. The attitude of most persons toward birth control is confused because it is an admixture of good and bad elements. While birth control is right in its aim of securing the regulation of population, it is wrong in the choice of means. There can be no doubt that the regulation of the number of children is often desirable for personal and social reasons. Socially, uncontrolled breeding intensifies the struggle for existence and brings about ruthless competition between people. It puts upon parents a responsibility they may not be able to discharge and may become a contributory cause of crime, war, and poverty. But though humane and rational considerations demand and justify serious attempts to regulate the birth of children, the use of physical means for securing this purpose is fundamentally indefensible. Although the physical means of birth control are advocated on humanitarian grounds, it is almost always with selfish ends and for avoiding the responsibility of bearing and bringing up children. And since the physical consequences of yielding to desire can successfully be avoided through the use of these means, those who have not begun to be awake to higher values may thus become victims to indulgence and bring about their own physical, moral, and spiritual ruin by neglecting mental control. The use of physical means obscures the spiritual aspect of the problem and is far from contributing to the awakening of man to his dignity and freedom as a spiritual being. For spiritual aspirants in particular, and indeed for all human beings, because all are potentially spiritual aspirants, It is inadvisable to employ physical means for the regulation of children. They must rely upon mental control, for mental control secures the humanitarian aims and is indispensable for restoring man to his divine dignity and spiritual well-being. Only through the exercise of mental control is it possible for man to rise from passion to peace, from bondage to freedom, and from animality to spirituality. In the minds of thoughtful persons, the spiritual side of this question must assume the importance it deserves. Joint responsibility of parenthood. Since woman has to undertake the task and the responsibility of bearing and rearing children, she may seem to be affected by any possible failure in mental control more seriously than man. But in fact, it does not mean unfairness to woman. It is true that woman has this trouble and responsibility, but she has also the compensating joy of motherhood, which is beyond measure greater than the joy of fatherhood. Further, the man also has to face economic and educational responsibilities towards the children. In a properly adjusted marriage, there is no injustice in the distribution of the parental responsibility shared by man and woman. When the father, as well as the mother, is truly conscious of responsibility, inconsiderateness gives place to active and cooperative endeavor to attain full mental control. And should there be any failure in mental control, they both cheerfully and willingly discharge the joint responsibility of parenthood.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Marvin, please.
From the spiritual point of view,
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
the paragraph before.
oh, sorry. If a person is not prepared to undertake the responsibility of children, there is only one course open to him. He must remain celibate and practice strict mental control. For though mental control is extremely difficult to attain, it is not impossible. From the spiritual point of view, therefore, birth control must be effected through mental control, not otherwise. Physical means are not advisable even when persons seek to use them merely as a provisional and secondary aid without intending to ignore the ideal of developing mental control. While using the physical means, they can never arrive at mental control, though they may want it in earnest. On the contrary, they become addicted to the use of physical means and even begin to justify them. To explain still more clearly what happens in the use of physical means, while they think that they are using them merely as a preliminary step before mental control is fully developed, they actually get addicted to their use. And though they may for some time remain under the delusion that they are trying to develop mental control, they are losing it. In short, mental power is undermined by reliance on the physical means. Thus, the use of physical means is detrimental to the development of self-control and disastrous for spiritual advancement. It is therefore not advisable even for the best of motives. At the beginning of married life, the partners are drawn to each other by lust as well as love. But they can, with conscious and deliberate cooperation, lessen the element of lust and increase the element of love. Through this process of sublimation, lust gives place to love. By sharing the joys and sorrows, the partners move from one spiritual triumph to another, from deep love to ever deeper love, till the possessive and jealous love of the initial period is replaced by self-giving and expansive love, so that through the intelligent experience of marriage, a person may traverse so much of the spiritual path that it needs only a touch by the Master to raise him into the sanctuary of eternal life. Love. Next chapter. Love and life and love are inseparable. Where there is life, there is love. Even the most rudimentary consciousness is ever trying to burst its limitations and to experience unity with others. Though each form of consciousness is distinct, all are forms of the same life, and the latent sense of inner reality indirectly makes itself felt even in the world of illusion through the attraction which one form has for another. Love in nature. The law of gravitation, to which all planets and stars are subject, is a reflection of the love that pervades the universe. Even the forces of repulsion are expressions of love, since things are repelled from each other because they are more powerfully attracted elsewhere. Repulsion is the negative of attraction. The forces of cohesion and affinity, which prevail in the very constitution of matter, are positive expressions of love. An example of love at this level is in the attraction that the magnet exercises over iron. In the animal world, love becomes explicit in the form of conscious impulses directed towards different objects in the surroundings. This love is instinctive and takes the form of gratifying desires through the appropriation of suitable objects. When the tiger devours the deer, he is in a real sense in love with the deer. Sex attraction is another form of love at this level. All such expressions of love have one thing in common, which is they seek to satisfy some bodily impulse or desire. Human love. Human love, much higher than these forms of love, because human beings have a more developed form of consciousness, is, however, continuous with the lower forms of love, but different from them, because it exists with a new factor, which is reason. Sometimes human love manifests itself as divorced from reason. Sometimes it comes into conflict with it, or it may express itself in the harmonized whole, where love and reason are balanced. Thus, human love may have three forms. In the first, the spheres of thought and love are separate. That is, the sphere of love is practically inaccessible to the operation of reason, and love is allowed little or no access to the objects of thought. Complete separation between these two aspects is never possible, but when there is an oscillating functioning of love and reason, there is love unillumined by reason, or reason unenlivened by love. In the second, love and reason are simultaneous, but not in harmony with each other. This conflict is a necessary phase in the evolution towards the synthesis of love and reason. In the third, the synthesis between love and reason is accomplished, with the result that both love and reason are transformed and a new level of consciousness emerges, which is best described as superconsciousness. Human love makes its appearance in the matrix of ego consciousness, which has countless desires. Love is colored by these factors in many ways. Just as we get a kaleidoscope by the combinations of simple elements, there is a limitless qualitative variety in the range of love caused by combinations of psychic factors. And as there are infinite shades in the colors of flowers, so there are differences in human love. The lower forms of love. Human love is encircled by obstructive factors such as infatuation, lust, greed, anger, and jealousy, which are either forms of lower love or the inevitable results of lower forms of love. Infatuation, lust, and greed are to be looked upon as perverted forms of love. In infatuation, a person gets enamored. In lust, he develops a craving for sensations. And in greed, he desires to possess. Of these three forms of love, greed tends to extend itself from the original object to the means of obtaining it. Thus, persons become greedy for money or power or fame as instruments for the possession of the objects craved after. Anger and jealousy come into existence when these forms of love are thwarted or threatened.
Thanks, Marv. Ernie, please. Oh, you're still muted, Ern.
The lower, the enemy of the higher. These forms of love are obstructive to pure love, and the stream of love can never become clear until freed from them. If consciousness gets caught in the rhythm of the lower, it cannot emancipate itself from its self-created processes and finds it difficult to advance. Thus, the lower form of love has to be given up to allow for the appearance of the higher. The emergence of higher love from the shell of lower love is helped by the constant exercise of discrimination. Therefore, love has to be distinguished from the obstructive factors of infatuation, lust, greed, and anger. In infatuation, the person is a passive victim of attraction. But in love, there is an active appreciation of the intrinsic worth of the subject.
Or object.
Of the object, thank you. Love and lust. Love differs from lust because in lust there is reliance upon the object of sense and spiritual subordination of the soul in relation to it. But love puts the soul into direct and coordinate relation with the reality, which is behind the form. Therefore, lust is heavy, while love is light. In lust, there is narrowing of life, while in love, there is expansion in being. To have loved one's soul is to add its life to your own. Your life is, as it were, multiplied, and you virtually live in two centers, If you love the whole world, you vicariously live in the whole world. But in lust, there is an ebbing of life and a sense of dependence upon the form regarded as another. Thus, in lust, there is accentuation of separateness and suffering. But in love, there is unity and joy. Lust is dissipation. Love is recreation. Lust is the craving of the senses. Love is the expression of the spirit. Lust seeks fulfillment, but love experiences fulfillment. In lust, there is excitement. In love, there is tranquility. Love is equally different from greed, which is possessiveness in gross and subtle forms. It seeks to appropriate things and persons, as well as such abstract and intangible things as fame and power. In love, the annexation of the other person to one's individual life is not desired. And there is free and creative outpouring that replenishes the psychic being of the beloved independently of any expectations for the self. There is a paradoxic greed which seeks for the self the appropriation of another object, leads to the spiritual incorporation of the beloved in the being of the lover.
Oops.
In greed, the self aims to possess the object, but is spiritually possessed by the object, but is itself spiritually possessed by the object. In love, the self offers itself to the beloved, but in that fact finds the beloved included in its own being. Love awakened through grace. Infatuation, lust, and greed constitute spiritual maladies often rendered more virulent by anger and jealousy. But pure love, in sharp distinction from them, is the bloom of spiritual perfection. Human love is so tethered by limiting conditions that the spontaneous appearance of pure love from within becomes impossible. So when such pure love exists, it is always a gift arising in the heart in response to the descent of grace from the Master. When pure love is first received as a gift of the Master, it is lodged in the consciousness of the aspirant as a seed in a favorable soil. And in the course of time, the seed develops into a plant, and then into the full-grown tree. The grace of the Master is, however, subject to preliminary spiritual preparation. This preparation is not completed until the aspirant has built into his psychic being some divine attributes. When a person avoids backbiting and thinks more of the good points in others than of their defects, and when he practices tolerance and desires the good of others, even at cost to himself, the aspirant is ready to receive the grace of the Master. One of the greatest obstacles to the spiritual preparation of the aspirant is worry. And when with effort this obstacle is overcome, a way exists for the cultivation of the divine attributes, which constitute the spiritual preparation of the disciple. As soon as the disciple is ready, the grace of the master descends. For the master, who is the ocean of divine love, is always on the lookout for the soul in whom his grace will fructify.
Thanks, Aaron. Marion, please.
The kind of love awakened by the grace of the master is a rare privilege. The mother willing to sacrifice all for her child, and the martyr prepared to give up his very life for his country, are indeed supremely noble, but they may not have tasted of the pure love which comes through the grace of the master. Even the great yogis who, sitting in caves and mountains, are completely absorbed in deep samadhi, do not necessarily have this precious love. Love as discipline. Pure love awakened through the grace of the master is more valuable than any other method adopted by the aspirant, for it combines the merits of all the disciplines, but excels them in its efficacy to lead the aspirant to his goal. When this love is born, the aspirant has only one desire: to be united with the divine beloved. Withdrawal of consciousness from all other desires leads to infinite purity. Therefore, nothing purifies the aspirant more completely than this love. The aspirant is willing to offer everything for the divine beloved, and no sacrifice is too difficult. All his thoughts are turned away from the limiting self and are centered on the divine beloved. And through the intensity of this ever-growing love, he eventually breaks through the limitations of the self and becomes united with the beloved. This is the consummation of love. When love has thus found its fruition, it has become divine. Human love is for the many in the one. Divine love is for the one in the many. Human love leads to complications and tangles. Divine love leads to integration and freedom. In divine love, the personal and impersonal aspects are equally balanced. But in human love, the two aspects alternate. The personal note leads to blindness, to the intrinsic worth of other forms, so that, as in the sense of duty, when love is predominantly impersonal, if it often makes a man cold, rigid, and mechanical. The sense of duty is experienced as external constraint of behavior. But in divine love, there is freedom and spontaneity. Human love, in its personal and impersonal aspects, is limited. But divine love, with its fusion of the personal and the impersonal, is infinite. Even the highest type of human love is subject to the limitations of the individual nature, which persists till the seventh plane. But divine love arises after the disappearance of the individual mind and is free from the trammels of individual nature. In human love, the duality of the lover and the beloved persists. But in divine love, the lover and the beloved are one. At this stage, the aspirant has stepped out of the domain of duality and become one with God. For divine love is God. When the lover and the beloved are one, that is the end and the beginning. The universe exists for the sake of love. It is for the sake of love that the universe sprang into existence, and for the sake of love, it is kept going. God descends into the realm of illusion because the apparent duality of the beloved and the lover is contributory to his conscious enjoyment of his own divinity. The development of love is conditioned and sustained by the tension of duality. God suffers the apparent differentiation into the multiplicity of souls for the sake of the game of love. They are his own forms, and in relation to them, he assumes the role of the divine lover and the divine beloved. As the beloved, he is the real and ultimate object of appreciation. And as the divine lover, he is their savior, drawing them back to himself. Though the entire world of duality is but an illusion, it has come into being for a significant purpose. Love is the reflection of God's unity in the world of duality. It is the significance of creation. If love were excluded from life, all souls in the world would assume externality to each other, and their only possible relations and contacts would be superficial and mechanical. It is because of love that the contacts and relations between individual souls become significant. And it is love which gives meaning to every happening in the world of duality. But the love that gives meaning to the world of duality is a standing challenge to it. As love gathers strength, it generates creative restlessness and becomes the spiritual dynamic which ultimately succeeds in restoring to consciousness the original unity of being. God is infinite love. Chapter 29. God is not understood until he is understood as infinite love. In the beyond state, from which the entire universe springs and into which it merges, God is eternally infinite love. It is only when God's love is in the limited context of forms, which arise in the interim period of the appearance of the illusory universe of duality, that its infinity seems to have been impaired. 3 stages of the lover. Even in the lowest life of the physical sphere, God is experiencing himself as a lover, but as a lover who is ignorant of the true nature of himself or the beloved, the state of a lover who is separated from the beloved by the curtain of duality. It is nevertheless the beginning of a long process by which the lover breaks the enveloping curtain of ignorance and comes into his own truth as unbounded and unhampered love. But to be initiated into infinite love, the lover has to pass through two other stages characteristic of the subtle and mental spheres.
Thanks, Marion. Rosalie, please.
Lover of the subtle sphere. The lover in the subtle sphere is not free from lust, but its intensity is half that in the physical sphere, and there is no gross expression of it. The lover in the physical sphere is entangled with physical objects, and his lust finds physical expression. But in the subtle sphere, it is loosened from attachment to physical objects. Hence, it remains unexpressed in physical form. He experiences love as a longing for being united with the beloved. Thus, in the subtle sphere, love is expressed as longing, lust as a craving for sensations, is disregardful of the well-being of the beloved. But in longing, though it continues to be possessive, the beloved is recognized. Longing is a less limited form of love than lust. And the curtain of duality becomes transparent. For the duality between the lover and the beloved is consciously sought to be overcome. Lover of the mental sphere. The lover in the mental sphere has an even freer expression of love. In him, though lust has not fully disappeared, it is sublimated, so that only about 1/4 of the original lust of the physical sphere remains in latent form without expression. In the mental sphere, lust does not have subtle expression. The lover is detached from subtle objects and is free from possessive longing for the beloved. In the mental sphere, love expresses itself as complete resignation to the will of the beloved. All selfish desire, including longing for the presence of the beloved, has disappeared. The emphasis is on the worth and will of the beloved, and there is abundant release of love in its pure form. However, even in the mental sphere, love is not infinite, since there is still present the curtain of duality that separates the lover from the beloved. Love, no longer under the influence of selfishness, is still experienced through the medium of the finite mind, just as in the lower spheres, it is experienced through the medium of the lower bodies. Divine love. Love becomes consciously infinite when the individual mind is transcended. Such love is rightly called divine because it is characteristic of the God state in which duality is overcome. Divine love is unlimited in essence and expression because it is experienced by the soul through the self itself. In the physical, subtle, and mental spheres, the lover is conscious of separation from the beloved. But when these spheres are transcended, the lover is conscious of unity with the beloved. Divine love is entirely free from the thraldom of desires and the limiting self. The lover has no being apart from the beloved. He is the beloved. God, as infinite love, first delimits himself in the forms of creation and recovers his infinity through the different stages of creation. All the stages of God's experience as a lover culminate in his experiencing himself as the sole beloved. The sojourn of the soul is a divine romance in which the lover, who in the beginning is conscious of emptiness, frustration, superficiality, and the chains of bondage, attains an increasingly fuller expression of love and finally merges into the unity of the lover and the beloved in the supreme and eternal truth of God as infinite love.
Go on, Rosalie, please.
Yeah, it's too bad they don't insert that in the lover and the beloved right here. It's interesting. The conditions of happiness. Every creature seeks happiness. All that man desires or undertakes is for the sake of happiness. Power, because he expects happiness from its use. Money, because he thinks it will secure for him the conditions of his happiness. Knowledge, health, beauty, science, art, literature, because he feels that the pursuit of happiness is dependent upon them. Worldly success and fame, because he hopes for happiness in their attainment. Everyone seeks to be happy, yet most people are in some kind of suffering. The installments of happiness they get in their lives are neither unadulterated nor abiding. Man's life moves between the opposites of pain and pleasure. If moments of pleasure leave a trace, it is of a memory that augments the pain of having lost them.
Thanks, Rosalie. Mahu, please.
Man does not seek suffering. It comes to him as an outcome of his search for happiness. Happiness is sought through the fulfillment of desires, but in the pursuit of desires, he is preparing for suffering from their non-fulfillment. The tree of desire has two kinds of fruit, one sweet, the other bitter. The tree cannot be made to yield only one kind of fruit, so that he who would gather pleasure must be prepared for pain. Guided by desires, man seeks the pleasures of the world with hope, but the zest does not remain constant, because even while reaching out for the cup, he has to drink large measures of sufferings. Enthusiasm for pleasure gets abated by the experience of suffering. His moods subject him to ups and downs and to constant change. Fulfillment of desires does not lead to their termination. They get submerged for a while, only to reappear with intensity. When one is hungry, he eats, but is soon hungry again. If one eats too much, he experiences pain and discomfort. It is the same with every desire of the world. Page 255. If a person experiences the suffering that waits upon desires, his desires get mitigated. Sometimes intense suffering may detach him from worldly life, but this detachment is often set aside by fresh desires. Many persons temporarily lose their interest in worldly objects, owing to the impact of acute suffering. But to pave the way for freedom from desires, the detachment must be lasting. There are varying degrees of detachment. Not all are lasting. Temporary detachment. The temporary mode of detachment is known as smashan vairagya, smashan vaigarya. It's a Sanskrit word, because it is usually in the burial ground that such thoughts arise, and they stay in the mind only as long as the person is in the presence of death. Such modes of detachment seem strong while they last, but when the experience is forgotten, the mood vanishes. Intense detachment. Sometimes the mood of detachment is more lasting and not only endures for a considerable time, but modifies the general attitude to life. This is called Tivra Vairagya, Tivra Vaigarya, or intense dispassion. It usually arises owing to some misfortune, and under its influence, the person renounces worldly things. Tivra Vaigarya has its own spiritual value, but it is also likely to disappear or to be upset by desires and does not endure because it is not born of understanding. It is but a reaction to life. Now, complete detachment. The kind of detachment that lasts comes from the understanding of suffering and its cause. It is based upon the knowledge that the things of this world are passing and that to cling to them is bound to be a source of pain. Man seeks pleasure and tries to avoid pain, but as long as there is attachment to worldly objects, he must invite the suffering of not possessing them. Lasting detachments with freedom from desires and attachment is called Purna Vairagya, or complete dispassion. It is one of the essential conditions of true happiness, for he who has complete detachment no longer creates for himself the suffering that comes from desires. Desirelessness causes a man to be unmoved by pleasure and sorrow. He is not upset by opposites. The same is true of praise and blame. The only way of not being distressed by blame is to be detached from praise also. The equanimity that remains unaffected by opposites is possible only through complete detachment. This is an essential condition of happiness. He who has complete detachment is no longer at the mercy of the opposites of experience. He is free from the thraldom of desires and ceases to create his own suffering. Of all sufferings, mental suffering is most acute. Even yogis who can endure great physical suffering find it difficult to keep free from mental suffering, rooted in the frustration of desires. Yet the state of complete desirelessness is latent in everyone. And when through complete detachment, one reaches the state of wanting nothing, the unfailing inner source of happiness is reached. You want to continue?
Yes, please.
Contentment. Most human suffering created by desires is unnecessary because desires are not necessary. Desirelessness means freedom from self-inflicted suffering. When imagination does not reach out towards things that do not matter. This is to be established in peace. When mind is contented, he does not require solutions to problems because the problems have disappeared. When it is understood that desires are the bondage of the spirit and the decision is made to give them up, it is found to be a painful process. Because the decision is contrary to the ego mind. Because renunciation of desires is the curtailment of the life of the ego mind. It is accompanied by acute suffering. Such suffering is wholesome because it liberates the soul from bondage.
Wholesome suffering. Thank you, Mahu.
Wholesome suffering.
Thank you,
No,
Mahu.
yeah.
Mr. Vijay Balakar, do you care to read today, Vijay?
Yes, Jai Baba, Jai Baba. The life of freedom, happiness is difficult to achieve. For man has complicated his life by the growth of desires, and to go back to simplicity amounts to the renunciation of what seems to have become a part of the self. When a man, through great suffering, understands the true nature of desires, he realizes that suffering is to be welcomed. My God. Suffering may come to eliminate further suffering. Man is not content to create suffering only for himself, but creates it for his fellow man. Thus arise wars in which there is disregard for the well-being of others. In the pursuit of happiness, to the exclusion of the happiness of others, the false self becomes accentuated and burdensome. When man is selfish in the pursuit of happiness, his carelessness and cruelty to others recoil upon himself. Oh. When a man is desireless, he not only eliminates the suffering he causes to others, but much of his own suffering. But mere desirelessness does not yield positive happiness, though it protects from self-created suffering and goes a long way towards making happiness possible. True happiness begins when a man learns the art of right adjustment to other persons. And right adjustment involves self-forgetfulness and love. Love is adulterated with selfish motives introduced into consciousness by the operation of accumulated sanskaras. It is extremely difficult to purge consciousness of deep-rooted ignorance expressing itself through the idea of I and mine. The feeling of I and mine may be present even in the expression of love. Pure love cannot be forced, neither can it be taken away by force. It manifests itself from within with spontaneity. What can be achieved through decision is the removal of the factors that prevent manifestation. Love awakened by the master. It is when aspirant has developed an intense longing for pure love that he prepares for the intervention of the master, who through direction brings him into the state of divine love. Only a master can awaken love through the divine love which he imparts. Divine love cannot be awakened except by contact with the incarnation of love. Oh. Merely too long for love may result in a theory about love with the heart remaining empty. When true love is awakened, it is the realization of God. The happiness obtained through realizing God is worth all the physical and mental suffering in the universe. Even those who are not God realized can through yoga control their minds to the extent that nothing makes them feel pain and suffering. They remain untouched by suffering, however great. But though advanced yogis can annul suffering, they do not experience the happiness of the realizing God. God realization is self-sustained. Where's gone? Even those God realization is self-sustained, eternally fresh, unfading, boundless, and indescribable happiness. And for this happiness, the world has sprung into existence. Oh.
Great place to stop. We'll continue that next week.